Everybody, welcome back to the Beyond the Peloton podcast. I'm Spencer Martin from the Beyond the Peloton newsletter. I'm here with Andrew Vontz of the Choose the Hard Way podcast, to betterlab.io. We are talking Paris-Roubaix, Mathieu van der Poel's absolute dominance of pretty much every cobbled race he enters, except for Ghent-Wevelgem. He's soloing from pretty much however far out he wants to rack up a historic amount of monuments in a short amount of time. But before we get into that, Andrew, do you want to plug anything, your podcast, your company, before we get going?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love you all to come check out the betterlab.io. We're getting ready to launch our public beta. Our product will help you build mindful, science-backed practices to sleep better so you're rested for the things you love doing, like listening to this podcast and riding your bicycle. Come check us out at thebetterlab.io. And if you're looking for another podcast to listen to, check out Choose the Hard Way. You can find us everywhere you listen. It's a podcast about how hard things build stronger humans who have more fun. And I feel like we've seen a little bit of that happening out on the cobbles recently.
I don't know if I would call it fun. We were seeing people going. Did you have Van der Poel, when he attacked, he was like for sustained periods going 60 kilometers an hour, which is close to 40 miles an hour on the flats on roads that don't want you to go fast. So if you're at home and you're thinking, I could keep up with these guys, they're not that good. You could not. That is ridiculous. That is unbelievably fast. Van der Poel wins his second Roubaix in 2 years, back to back. I would say even more impressively, it's the second year in a row his Alpecin team finished 1-2 with the same two riders. I don't think that's ever been done before. Jasper Philipsen getting second for 2 years in a row. We'll unpack that maybe towards the end of the show. That's kind of an interesting little like great white subplot lurking around this season, because he's not signed for next year. And Van der Poel does the Flanders Roubaix double, which actually is not as uncommon as you think, especially in modern cycling. We'll try to put his 50, I think it was a 59K breakaway, into context. Also not as uncommon as you would think at Roubaix with dominant riders. But Andrew, and I don't want to be a downer to get things started, but the cobble races are my favorite races of the year, my favorite time of year. I think I'm ready. I'm ready to put these in my rearview mirror. Like, I've seen enough of Mathieu van der Poel riding away from the field with 50 whatever K to go, doing some podcasts about it, trying to break it down on the newsletter. I'm just like, I'm ready for a change of pace. All right, can we get this man at Liège and give him a challenge? Maybe some steep hills. Maybe anyone has a chance there. And I feel bad saying that, because what his Alpecin team is doing, the domination they've displayed, is like nothing to scoff at. It's unbelievable. Like, he's able to ride away, not just because he's the best rider and incredibly physically gifted and technically skilled, but they are blowing these races up. They blew it up with 160K to go. That's when they really started turning the screws, which is like almost inconceivably far out. But they do it because they know that it gives them the advantage to tire everybody out. So then when everyone's on the limit, Van der Poel says, I'm going to ride away and win this race. Like, what was your thought coming away from Roubaix? Did you think this was an awesome race? Were you wowed by the effort, or are you ready to, let's get to some hills on the other side of this country?
Yeah, 2 years ago, I certainly don't feel that we thought we would be talking about Alpecin team domination in 2024. So I think it's remarkable what the team is doing. Chapeau to the Roodhoofs. It's absolutely
it's actually
incredible.
Really, yeah. Like, right? Those guys are unbelievable. It's actually kind of an interesting thing, because you see this a lot in sports, like these guys who are unbelievably detail oriented and just focused on winning often were, no, I don't want to say middling, but mid-tier riders themselves. It's not the guys who reach the great heights that usually go on to be great managers.
Yeah. And for anyone who watched Unchained, I feel like the Roodhoofs kind of started to get this reputation like they were Statler and Waldorf, the names, of course, of the judges on the Muppets, if anyone here is a Muppets fan, but they seem kind of sour, domineering, and in fact, they're strategic geniuses. It turns out, playing some like serious money ball. Granted, they do have probably one of the highest paid riders in the sport, but they have put together just a remarkable team. So I think that is one of the key takeaways from this race. Like you, Spencer, I thought that we had put the Mathieu van der Poel time trial season behind us at the conclusion of the cyclocross world championships earlier in the season. And actually, I was thinking about this weekend. If for anyone out there who's a fan of cyclocross, perhaps you've spent some time out there at the Valmont Bike Park. A couple of years ago, before MVDP and Wout made the full transition into road racing, I think a lot of people, myself included, felt kind of sorry for everyone else who was racing professional cyclocross, and almost that they were less than, that they were not equal to professionals racing on the road at the world tour level. I think this was a commonly held perception because Wout and Mathieu van der Poel were so soundly destroying them in every race. I honestly, in my wildest dreams, never thought that when they crossed over to road racing, that we would see the same level of domination on the road. And in fact, that's what we're seeing this season. So it turns out it doesn't matter what talent pool they're in. They're just that much better. And for Wout, when he can stay on the bike.
Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But on the root hooves, like the fact that they signed Van der Poel when they did, like they were a cross team. That's how they got him. Were they just eating ramen for like 3 years straight? Like, how did they afford him for the first few years of his pro career? Because if you remember 2019, he was unbelievable. Like, it was clear at Amstel Gold when he mowed everybody down. Like, it was clear that he was going to be a big star. Like, I don't know how they pinched enough pennies to keep him on that team until it seems like now they finally had like a windfall from Canyon, and he's paid at the level that he deserves. Probably still underpaid, to be honest with you, if we consider the value he's driving for both the brand and the team. A pretty mid-tier rider I heard recently was shopping himself around for 2 million euros a year. So if that guy is getting 2 million euros a year, then Van der Poel should be getting 45 million euros a year because he's that much better than him. But it's really impressive they kept him. And even if we think about, this is the most surprising thing about the domination we've seen from Van der Poel so far. Like, go back 2 years ago, cast your mind back 2 years ago. And when you have, I think it was 2 years ago, 2021, 3 years ago, whatever that was, when he's pulling like Sonny Cabrelli and Florian Vermeesch, he couldn't drop him, pulls them to the velodrome at Roubaix and loses a sprint. I mean, the guy would just, he was strong, but he'd make all the wrong decisions. Everything he did was wrong. I think it was the 2022 Giro, just like, remember those weird breakaways that seemed to have no point? He's really tightened it up strategy-wise. And I do think that that's a credit to Alpecin. They've worked with him to teach him how to race. And it's like he's just doing everything right. Like, he did not put a foot wrong last weekend at Roubaix, the weekend before that at Flanders. Like, everything's perfect. Every tactical decision, which was not the case a few years ago. And maybe he's not gotten physically better. Maybe he's gotten slightly better, but it just seems like those slight tweaks have allowed him to go from like, wow, this guy's really talented, but he's not going to win at the same rate as Boonen and Cancellara, to just a big race winning machine. Like, it's been shocking the last 12 months, how many big races he's won, how many big races he's won. To put it into perspective, through his first 17 monument starts, he's won 6 monuments. So that's a crazy rate. That's like a 34% win rate. Eddie Merckx, pretty good rider. You might have heard of him. The greatest rider of all time. Won 5 monuments through his first 17 monument starts. So Van der Poel's winning at a really, 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 really high rate. He has 3 Flanders, 2 Roubaix. The record is 4 and 3. So he's closing in on that record. I do think we are seeing like the greatest cobbled racer of all time before our eyes.
We might have to have Jamie fact check this. I am wondering, the early years when Alpecin had Van der Poel, I'm curious if this was a Cavendish type situation where there were like really heavy sponsor subsidies going on. Because if you recall, in his early years, he was very prominently featured in Zwift ads. Zwift was a team sponsor, and that's when Zwift was very flush with venture capital and spending heavily on paid acquisition. So I wonder if that was part of the early strategy and how they were able to win him and retain him early in his career.
That's a good point. Yeah, and they were splashing big back then.
Big bucks.
Yeah, that could. Yeah, maybe that probably is. Every sponsor they had was basically just wanting to work with Van der Poel and subsidizing his salary. Another thing about that team, like, they were at the front with 160K to go, beating everybody up, both through pace and through body force. But they're just big team. They're big guys. They look like a rugby team. And kind of their big money ball strategy is, hey, who's the best cross racers in the world? Maybe we should look into them and sign them. Like they just have a feeder from cyclocross. I mean, this helps that they're cross team, cyclocross to road. But like our good friend, our best friend, Cameron Mason, didn't he just sign for Alpecin?
Cameron Mason did just sign with Alpecin, and in our interview with Cameron Mason, we did tell him he would go to the World Tour. I don't think he said it himself, but we looked in the beyond the Peloton crystal ball and made this prediction, and now it is so.
And if you watch cyclocross, he's very good, one of the best cross racers in the world. But the notable thing about him is he's young and he's not signed to race on the road, but by a big team. So I didn't feel like it took a genius to put those two and two together, but they just seem to be the only team that's, fishing where the fish are, so to speak. When while everyone else is chasing the Mikel Landa waterfalls of the world, where they just, I really want to put together an expensive GC team to finish 7th at the tour. That's awesome. They're just like, no, we're not going to spend any money on that. Let's just focus on becoming the best one-day racing team. Maybe not of all time, but pretty dang close.
We'll see.
And so Mads Pedersen, we should say, incredible ride to finish third. I think maybe some people thought that was disappointing, and he was definitely what do you call it, the Dominguez Hills crit scene in LA, where you have a good guy, like the one good local pro up the road, and then his teammates are marking everybody. That's pretty much what was happening to Mads Pedersen. And Lawrence Pithy getting 7th after crashing. How old is he? 21 years old. First Roubaix, not even from Europe. That's really, really, really impressive. But now that and Tom Pidcock, our guy Tom Pidcock was out there, I believe his first ever Roubaix start. Couldn't walk on Monday, racing Roubaix by Sunday. You could question the decision making there by Ineos. Hey Tom, how you doing? Can you walk yet? Yeah, we know Roubaix is tomorrow. Do you want to race that? Comes in with absolutely like no preparation, is in the front group until he just gets dropped from what looks like lack of fitness. But Andrew, does Tom Pidcock kind of like, he is unbelievably talented. He's not getting any better. Like, I just feel like I'm Chicken Little here running around of like, what is going on with Tom Pidcock's career? He kind of reminds me of like a guy that you ride with a lot and he's just so talented, doesn't really train that much, but just is really, really good. But never fully like improves that much because he's just like partly interested in bike racing. The problem is Tom Pidcock is like a highly paid professional and kind of, it's just like, why does his season have no structure to it? He's like here, he's there, get him at Roubaix, have him do this. It just never feels that focused.
Yeah, I feel like this is the Ineos chaos theory strategy. And I feel like if Tom Pidcock were your riding buddy, he's that riding buddy who's doing some secret training. That's, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, you finish the bus stop and wave goodbye. You maybe head to the Scratch Cafe. Tom's going out to do a few LT intervals up Flagstaff, right? So like he's maybe he's getting motor paced by Alan Lim. He kind of has that vibe to me. Pretty remarkable. 17th place at Paris-Roubaix, 620 down on the winner. I mean, I think what we're seeing happen with Pidcock, yes, he is a rider who wants to keep tasting many different varieties of pie. He wants to be back out there, XCO. He loves the cyclocross. He did make some sacrifices this year, and I think that what we're seeing is the GC Pidcock. I mean, do you doubt that this man can win the Tour de France?
I mean, assuming he might be the only one not injured by the Tour de France,
right?
I think he's got a decent shot. I do think if he's going for GC, that's just such an odd decision. Like, hey man, you want to go to Roubaix and race? It's like, this isn't a development team. This is a $50 million a year budget team, payroll team, and they sent AJ August, our American compatriot, who's got to be one of the smallest riders in the Peloton, tiny.
Right.
The guy was like at the back first cobble section, just getting absolutely beat up by these cobblestones. I just don't understand it. Like if AJ August was on Bardiani and they got a Paris-Roubaix invite, I could understand why they need to fill out the numbers. I just don't understand why Ineos is filling out numbers. And if you're Josh Tarling and you're trying to win this race, are you a little upset of like, wait a second, why aren't you sending guys to this race that can help me win? Like, what's AJ August doing here? What is this? And then, by the way, did you see Josh Tarling? He had a mechanical. Ineos team card said, "Hold on, bud." And he's not motor pacing the car. He's holding on to the car, and they are accelerating from group to group to group to take him back to the front of the race. And then he gets DQ'd, obviously, because that's not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, because you're not Mario Cipollini and it's not 2003, pal. You just you can't take the chariot ride like you used to. Yeah, Pidcock doesn't really have that cobbles physique, yet he put in a hell of a ride on the
I mean, he
cobbles.
made it look easy.
Yeah.
It's funny we're
He did
talking
make it
about
look
him because he
easy.
finished 6
Yeah.
minutes down, but if you saw it, you just it's class. It's hard to explain, but it was impressive.
Yeah, I felt like the Pidcock appearance was not really about the race. I feel like Ineos has fallen into this trap of they want the flashy TikTok video or Instagram story / reel. And they did did you see the reveal, the Pidcock reveal?
No.
Yeah. I mean, like, they made a moment out of it. I feel like he like stepped off the bus and was like, I'm going to Paris-Roubaix.
I guess it is exciting. I mean, they used to do this with their tour squad. Do you remember this? It would be like 3 days before the tour. They'd be like, we don't know who's racing. I don't know. Come to the start of the race to see who's there.
Yeah. I mean, also, this is typically a day 24 to 36 hours before a race is when you might get an Astana rap video as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do support those.
I do too. I'm looking forward. Pog also has a rap video. It's in the middle of someone else's music video. Link in show notes.
Link in show notes. I mean, just the last word on Ineos for 10 minutes, because I feel like I could just have a podcast where I talk about Ineos all the time. They befuddle me. Astana finished, the first Astana rider finished ahead of the first Ineos rider at Paris-Roubaix. That is like, that shouldn't be acceptable for a team of Ineos's level.
Yeah. John Degenkolb, sorry.
Good ride.
Good ride. Not the ride. I mean, it's over, man.
It's over. And it does show how much it's over. It kind of sounds like a weird thing to say because he was in the front group for a while, but Roubaix is such a unique race that you're like, this guy just cannot. I'm going through his results really quick to make sure this is a correct statement. He really cannot compete at the front of World Tour races anymore. But Roubaix is so strange and so like skill based that he can still be there at the front of Roubaix. But I mean, 11th at Roubaix, that's as good as it's going to get at this point. He's only 35, which in 6 years, that's how old Mathieu van der Poel will be. So life comes at you fast, folks.
Wow, I'm just checking out the list of DNFs. Ineos, we had Josh Tarling, Ilya Viviani. Wow, I'm just looking at it. Soudal Quickstep, 4 DNFs.
Yeah.
Wow, pretty rough day out there for the Wolfpack.
Well, I'm going to keep called them the Chihuahua. They're the Chihuahuas now in the French press instead of the Wolfpack. And I mean, it is just that's a crazy situation, how bad they've gotten so fast. But, I think their top rider, I think this was the same thing just a few weeks ago. Top rider, Yves Lampard. I mean, that guy was like a bit player on their classics teams 5-6 years ago. And he's now their leader. That's not great. That's not a great position to be in. And of course, Lefebvre would, his like famous line is like, "Oh, judges when the classics are over." And then Evenepoel wins Liège and he can say, "Oh, we won a monument." But it's like, well, you just kind of have one good guy who wins a lot. And now he's hurt. So what are you going to do? They did have Tim Merlier win Scheldeprijs, but I think we can all agree it's maybe not exactly what the sponsors are looking for out of the spring from Soudal Quickstep. But to bring Wout back out, like, what do you think happens? Like last year, I rewatched last year's Roubaix, day before this Roubaix, and I had forgotten how good of a race it was. Very exciting. Wout and Van der Poel going at it. Wout flats. Van der Poel doesn't. And by the way, Van der Poel and the entire Alpecin team rarely flat. Unbelievable. Visma flats all the time. Like there's some difference there. I don't know if it's skill or equipment, but there's a major difference between those two teams and their ability to get over the cobblestones. But even though Wout Flats, very exciting Roubaix last year, I think it was clear this year, like the only guy who can ride with Van der Poel on these types of courses, like Roubaix specifically, is Van Aert. He's the only guy who could have challenged him. At Flanders, it's Van Aert and Pogacar and maybe Evenepoel. At Liège, it's Pogacar, Van Aert, and Evenepoel. And the fact that they're not there, like this is a really impressive victory. And I think everyone's going to say, oh, the classics are boring. Racing's boring now because everyone attacks far out. Look at Strade Bianche, look at E3, look at Flanders, look at Roubaix. It's like, well, because those guys are never racing each other. You know, like E3, he rode away from Van Aert, but that's just because Van Aert crashed, almost caught him. If Van Aert doesn't crash, he probably doesn't get away clean like that. It's a little odd to me, a little disappointing they never race each other. But if Van Aert was here, like, how do you think that plays out? Do you think he can challenge him at all?
Well, in which condition, post which wreck?
Well,
right? I mean, like, are we talking
assume
like
he doesn't
fully?
crash.
Yeah, fully healthy Wout. Yeah, I think he definitely can. I also, thinking back about the 2023 race, it does seem like Van der Poel is so deep in Wout's head at this point that we got a problem. I think we have I think we have a little bit of a problem. I mean, the guy's got to get a little bit of wind back in his sails. What do you think, Spencer?
I definitely feel like he's in his head. I will say, and I feel like I'm starting to feel like a tinfoil conspiracy theorist because for years I've been like, you don't understand. Van Aert is better than Van der Poel. He just has bad luck. In the blink of an eye, Van der Poel's won 6 monuments since Van Aert won his last monument. So I think on the one days, at least in terms of results generated, it's kind of game over. Like, unless Van der Poel has a few bad seasons and Van Aert is racking up wins, it just seems hard for Van Aert to ever close this gap down. I still think, I do think though, let's say 2023 Roubaix, but this shows you just cycling is just a bunch of fine margin events going one way or the other. 2023 Roubaix, let's say Van Aert doesn't flat. There's no guarantee. I actually think it was not actually in Van der Poel's favor to ride away because he would have pulled Van Aert to the velodrome and maybe lost that sprint. Like Van Aert's a very fast sprinter. So he might have lost that. I do think Van Aert, I just the way Van der Poel was riding on Sunday, I think it's hard to imagine anyone beating him. That was an incredible day. I went back to look at, were you watching this thinking, I've seen this before? Because 2018, Peter Sagan attacked almost the exact same place with 53K to go. He didn't solo because he bridged up to the breakaway. By the way, they caught the breakaway at 140K to go on Sunday. It's crazy. Usually the breakaway at Roubaix is caught towards the end, or even like in Matt Hayman's case, wins the race because they're caught so late. Peter Sagan caught the break and then used Sylvain Dillier to ride with him to the finish. And then 2012 Boonen broke away with 53K to go and 56K to go, win with the teammate, dropped his own teammate. Similar win actually to Van der Poel. And then 2010 Cancellara attacked 46K to go, soloed, also won E3 Flanders and Roubaix that year. So that's very similar to Van der Poel's season. And then 2006 Cancellara soloed with 16K to go. The point of this history lesson is just to show you a lot of times the classics are, I wouldn't say boring, but decided by events outside of the race. Because the reason like Boonen could solo away in 2012 is because Cancellara was hurt. I believe Boonen was either hurt or just not. Remember the cocaine years? I think 2010 was like Boonen's cocaine phase.
Who can forget him?
Yeah, he just wasn't himself, as you would imagine. And so, like, actually, Cancellara and Boonen would be inversely injured quite a bit during that run. They rarely ever faced off against each other at full strength. So it's not that unusual that Van Aert wouldn't be there. But I think that it might have been similar to the Grammont when Cancellara rode away and everyone thought he had a motor on his bike and dropped Boonen. I think we might have seen Van der Poel drop Van Aert on Sunday if he made it in one piece at the start line.
Yeah, Spencer, for some reason, I'm just thinking, because Boonen loves house music. He is supposed to have a collection of more than 10,000 records, or at least he did 15 years ago. I don't know if he does anymore, but I'm just imagining Cancellara and Boonen they're out on tour. Maybe they're the undercard for Dead Mouse, and they're on the road as Motors and Blow. That's their name.
Motors and Blow. It'd be sold out. I would go to that.
Yeah, I have that.
Oh, go
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I heard this secondhand. I didn't read this quote, but Bonin said someone asked him about Van der Poel, and he said, I accomplished Van der Poel's entire Palmares in one season. You're like, whoa, there's no love lost there. And so it's like, Tom Boonen, you won multiple Flanders in one season, but I respect the saltiness, that's for sure.
He's a competitor. I think he's into rally car racing now or something. It's great to see it channeled somewhere other than gravel, although maybe we'll see him in Emporia Memorial Day weekend. I have to say, I don't feel like I've seen more discussion of tires, tire pressure, pool noodles than I have this past weekend. I don't know if this has been verified by a second source, but I did see a media report that Van der Poel had been on 28s and then switched to 32s with the pool noodle and was running 50 psi, which is kind of bananas. And I also read that during the Tour of Flanders, he stopped several times to let air out of his tires. Like, I don't recall seeing that in the broadcast, and I feel like I would have. Did you catch that?
Who said this?
This, link in bio. I'll have to pull the story up again, but I did read it this week. I feel like it was Cycling Up to Date, which does that sound sketchy enough? I think it was AOL.
Cycling Up to Date is actually pretty good. Even though it sounds like a chat GPT generated site. Yeah. I did see him a few times early in both Roubaix and Flanders chasing back on. Maybe that's what that was, like early, like 200K to go, changing his tire pressure and then chasing back on.
Yeah, it could be. So Spencer, you kind of took us on a walk down the yellow brick road of cobbles past. As we look forward, a couple of questions for you. Like, let's say 2025, Jonathan Milan crashed this year. Like, if he's still with mods, so let's say we have that duo, they stay upright in the race. Not likely to happen, but let's say Wout decides, I am no longer GC Wout. He fully recovers. He puts back on I'm going to estimate 3 to 7 pounds of muscle that he's lost in his pursuit of becoming GC Wout. He goes to Red Bull. He decides, I'm all in on the cobbled classics. I can't have this gaping hole in my Palmares. I'm never going to win the Tour. Like, I'm going for Flanders and Roubaix. I've got the full backing of Red Bull. And Jasper Philipsen, who my son Sam continually reminds me is Jasper, not Jasper. Thank you for the correction, Sam. We've got Jasper on a different team. I do get the feeling that he really wants to win Roubaix, and he's just getting stuffed right now. So what do you think happens? Mods has more support. Wout goes to Red Bull. Jasper's on a different team. Does Van der Poel still win?
That's a great question. I think it's harder. I mean, the reason Van der Poel, part of the reason he won is because Johnny Vermeesch and Jasper Philipsen were just menacing everybody at the front. And here's a hot take. If Jasper Philipsen leaves Alpecin, which he probably will because he wants a 4-year deal with a bunch of money attached to it, and I don't think you don't become a rude hoof by giving those deals out willy-nilly, that's for sure. But I think if he goes to another team, you never see him on the podium again at Roubaix. I think part of his success is just being on that team, like vibing in the confidence pit that team is, and being able to get through the tricky parts. You're going to start seeing, like, we've seen this a million times. You leave the big team. Oh, suddenly you're flatting in the Arenberg. Suddenly you're not even making it to the Arenberg in the front group because you have flat tires. But it definitely is a lot harder for Van der Poel if Milan makes it to the last 50K. Pedersen has a teammate. Pedersen isn't 4K overweight, 4 kilos overweight because he crashed and is full of fluid. That probably didn't help. Van der Poel's there. Van der Poel has some support in the form of Red Bull. I do think people could challenge him. I don't think this is, I think there's a lot of hand-wringing going on of like, oh, Van der Poel's ruined cycling and no one will ever beat him. Like, it's going to be different in 2025. It's going to be harder. There'll be more competition. I saw someone tweet during the race, like, I hate super teams. It's like, Alpecin is not a super team. They're just like a well-run team that knows what they're good at and executes well. But Here's my big question for you: is Vanderpool going to win Liège-Bastogne-Liège?
No.
No. Who's going to beat him?
Pog.
That's probably the smart answer. Yes, Tadej Pogacar. But I cannot wait to see them go at it.
Oh, I can't either. Did Ben Healy have quite a ride at LBL last year? Am I remembering that correctly?
Ben Healy had quite the ride. I don't have his.
Yeah.
I think he got third. He was one of
Yeah.
the last people to be dropped by
Right.
Remco.
Yeah, we haven't. I mean, he does have the half ear cover POC helmet now with
Dude.
the visor. So, I mean, I haven't seen him do anything on TikTok recently, but I think he's going to come out swinging at LBL as well. And I feel like he's due for a big win.
I feel like he is too. And I was wrong. He got fourth at LBL.
Okay.
Santiago Buitrago out sprinted him for third. Yes, this is coming back to me now. He got second at Amstel. Yeah, Ben Healy's due. I don't know though. Vanderpool is so good. A lot of this comes down to, and like a friend of mine, Daniel Freebay, is always like going through the weights of these winners of these different races and saying Vanderpool is 5K heavier than the average Liège winner, so it's impossible. But it's just like you throw it all out when someone's as good as Mathieu Van Der Poel or Wout van Aert. Like these guys can put out numbers that no one else can even touch. So if they put their mind to it, they could win it. I should know. People think we're crazy for the GC Wout thing. Like it works people up. They reach out to me. They think we're out of our gourds for thinking he's chasing GC goals because he says he's not. But I think we've been around the block to know that anything a rider said should not be taken seriously or used against them in a court of law.
Yeah. Well, Spencer, you mentioned your friend Daniel. I'm going to mention something from a friend I don't know, but I feel a connection to, Whitney Houston. And she said, I believe the children are the future. And I'm thinking about Ben Healy, age 23, due for a win. Watch for him at LBL. And when it comes to GC Wout, I have an even more radical theory I haven't put forth publicly, but I think that now is the time. As we haven't really gotten into the Basque carnage and the aftermath. I mean, I think one of the biggest question marks coming out of that, and there are probably some certainties as well. I mean, it's pretty clear Jumbo is obfuscating the severity of Jonas's injuries, and who knows what's going to happen. There's been a lot of talk about like, okay, you take Jonas out of the equation. Are we looking at GC Sepp at the Tour? Sepp's interview following the crash at Tour of the Basque Country was interesting, I would say. My more radical theory is, what if we see GC Wout at the Tour?
GC Wout at the Tour. This is radical. I can't even respond. I don't hate it actually. I don't know. Wout is always very deferential about his ability climbing. He dropped Tadej Pogacar and Otakam. Which, oh wow, I wonder why do you think you're pretty good at climbing? You finished second at Tirreno Adriatico when it was probably the most competitive race it's been in years. He claims he's not a great climber, but man, these tour routes are not that they're not hard, but they're so fast that they're raced like so fast and so steady that I do think Wout could have a chance. And the Tour is so much about time trials. I don't think it's going to happen, but I love the idea. I love the idea. I think he would. This is going to sound crazy. I think it'd be a better option than Sepp Kuss, who is a really tough type of rider to lead a team at the Tour because of what I just said, because it is so much about the time trials, not as much about open court racing, if you will. Andrew, did you know Alpecin? I'm sure you knew this, but has it sunk in? They've swept the monument so far this year. They've won all three, and they could win the fourth. They have Mathieu Van Der Poel and Quinten Hermans. Like, it's not impossible. They probably won't win Lombardia, but the last rider not on UAE Visma or Alpecin was 2 years ago to win a monument. So we are living in the monoculture. And then on your point of Visma, we'll talk about the Bass crash in 1 second, but they are clearly obfuscating what's going on with Jonas to a strange point. Like our friend Jonathan Kaplan, right after the crash at Basque, they put out that he had a broken collarbone and I believe like a broken shoulder, or broken ribs and broken collarbone. I've had
Right.
that injury before. I was not carted off with oxygen. I did not look like I maybe had expired. So it was clear that wasn't quite right. And Jonathan sniffed this out like immediately and was like, well, if they weren't truthful about the situation at the Volta, then why would we believe him here? And then, of course, it came out the next day that he had serious lung injuries, like impact lung injuries that he could have died from. And then now it's actually, if you read their communication, it's quite vague, quite vague. Like seems like he's still in a hospital they just say northern Spain. I would assume he can't be transported. They said he had a successful procedure. They didn't really specify what for. Like, think it might have been the collarbone, but they made it. They didn't really even. They haven't mentioned the lungs since that corrected report. So there's just a lot unclear there. I think we have to assume we won't see him at the tour. And if you do see him at the tour, he's not going to be at the level that he needs to compete. Like if Tadej was really thrown off track with a broken wrist, I think a week or so in a hospital will hurt you a little bit more than that. But they kind of have like, do you remember after opening weekend, it was just like, oh wow, they're going to win everything. They just won Omloop and Kern so deep. They can plug anyone in there. I actually went back through the records. When they have a leader get hurt, they're surprisingly vulnerable. I mean, famously, that's not true when Jonas stepped up after Primoz was hurt, but let's just focus on the monuments. Since 2020, they've had one other rider place top 10 at Flanders or Roubaix in that time period, then Wout van Aert, and that's Christophe Laporte. So it's not some like super team that like is Pixie Cups that you pull one, another one comes. So maybe they will have to go to GC Wow. That would be incredible to see. That would make the season, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think no matter who ends up leading Visma Lisa bike at the tour, drama is going to go down. Like I think there's going to be serious drama within that team. Whoever's at the front. I also wanted to mention, I just pulled up the original tweet from regarding the Vingegaard injury, and one of the things that was mentioned was a pulmonary contusion. And for anyone who's familiar with this, I'm actually pulling up some information about this. This usually results from blunt chest trauma, shockwaves from penetrating chest injuries, or explosions. This is a very severe injury, and they're not saying that anything happened to Jonas's heart. And I am wondering, with like that level of high impact chest trauma, that is the kind of thing that can result in bruising of the heart as well. And we don't have any indication that happened, but I'm wondering what further injuries are lurking that we are not aware of, and what are going to be some of the second and third order consequences throughout the rest of the 2024 season as Jonas attempts to mount his comeback.
Yeah, we don't know that, but I guess that's the point. We don't know anything because they're being, I'd say, a little absurdly vague. But Andrew, can there be drama if you're not at the front? Like if Sepp is going for 9th place.
Oh yeah, are you familiar with Movistar? Come on.
Drama that we care about. Yeah, I guess Bora at the Vuelta, where they had a rider leave because the team would not support him for 7th place in the GC. So yeah, I guess there can be drama.
Yeah, it definitely goes down. I mean, we might see somebody exit the team and just go straight to gravel. Or, I mean, you do have to wonder, if the season's a wash, who's going to start focusing on the gravel world championships. I'm just putting it out there.
I'm kind of wondering what the heck happened to Van Barle and Laporte. Remember when this team was so deep that Mathieu Jorgensen would get no chance, right? It's like, oh man, this guy's going to get warehoused. We're never going to see him again. And then it's like, hey, Mathieu, can you lead the team? Well, what happened to the guys that are like monument winners, like on this team? Are they good? Can they race? No. Like maybe they were just sick. I don't know. But it was like, if you watch the first cobble section, like Laporte looked like he could barely ride a bike on it. And the guy's finished top 10 at Roubaix. So clearly he's good at riding cobblestones, but they just looked out of sync all day. They had to rely on the Van Dyke brothers. These are identical twins, finished both in the top 20. Were like the team's only racers at the front of the race. It was pretty absurd from a team of that depth, actually, that they had to rely on them, even though it was cool to see twins up there. But the crash at Basque Country, I mean, it's been almost a week at this point, so we're not going to add anything new to this. But why is this happening, Andrew? What's going on? And should anything be done to make racing safer, if that's even possible? Question mark.
I feel like I should just take the standard Spencer point of view here, which is we can't nerf the world, and we just have to let these professional athletes have at it.
That is my worldview. I don't even want to get into the politics of that. I actually do after rewatching this. They definitely should have nerfed that corner. It was clear that was a dangerous corner, and I learned that Jonas brought this up 6 months ago. He's like, "Yeah, that's
fake news.
That's fake news.
That is fake news. That has since been discredited. He did not do that.
How does that even get started?
Just someone on Twitter who has a large following said that, and then subsequently it turned out to not be true.
People on the internet all over the place. That isn't true.
Yeah. Oh, Jonas was out sniffing out the roots. He's like the truffle sniffer of roots underneath the road. He knew it was there. No, he didn't. In fact, I will say though, what kind of blew my mind was I feel like it took 5 or 6 days before anyone provided images of where the road had some surface issues related to the roots that were growing underneath the road. So that did turn out to actually be true. There are roots growing underneath the road from the trees next to the road, and they do make the road surface, it's going to cause some problems if you're hitting those at 50, 60 miles an hour.
Yeah, I think they call it like porpoising in F1. You start going like this, and yeah, that's what they were going 50 miles an hour into that corner. I mean, you could debate the wisdom of that in the first place. If you go 50 into a corner, do you think that's going to go well? Maybe don't do that. But I did so ASO races do signage really well. And this started a few years ago, and they even were padding like a few of the corners. I think it was stage 17 last year on the descent. They had a few corners padded that they earmarked as potentially dangerous ones, but they do a lot of good signage, like sharp turn coming up, things like that I don't think are present in non-ASO races.
Right.
Probably the easiest answer would just be make other race organizers do that as well. Would probably be a good start.
Yeah. By the way, my point about the photo of the roots was that it was surprising to me that there was no one on the ground who actually took a photo of the thing that caused the incident. I guess from what I gathered, there were no actual journalists within driving distance of that to share images of it. So I think a local cyclist actually went out, snapped some photos and said, here, in fact, are the photos of the roots that caused this wreck. And that's exactly what happened. And then it sounded like, as you noted, Spencer, lack of signage. It almost seemed like, it just was cartoonish, the level of problems that they had on the road there. I mean, I don't think you could have designed something that would have been worse for people flying off the road, like open metal grate, concrete ditch, rocks scattered about.
The rocks,
trees.
Yeah, they're just huge boulders. Yeah, let's get these right next to the apex of the turn. Andrew, how many journalists do you think were on the ground at that race? I
think there were 0 is kind of what I gathered. I don't think that anyone, this is part of what's sad about what's going on with journalism these days, is that due to the contraction of journalism, the lack of jobs, like there just aren't people on the ground to show us some of these things. So I'm grateful for that local that went out and snapped that photo. I do have to ask, Spencer, where are you at on Remco's bike handling and like what went down in the wreck now that you've had more time to reflect on it? Would you like to say anything?
Well, I'm so old. I remember when people would go single file down the Sens and they would go about 40 miles an hour. It's unclear to me why are they 5 wide on a descent 40K from the finish line at the Tour of the Basque Country? Like, I don't want to be like, I don't want to be anti-rider, but it just seems like there's no cost benefit analysis going on anymore. It just, I'm going to go as fast as I can down this descent and be first down it because that's what my director in my ear is telling me to do, instead of trying to discern, is this a good idea? Should we be going this fast? I mean, Remco, what do you think? Do you think he just rode off the road? I mean, I would ride off the road if I was going 50 miles an hour around a corner. Um, but it does, I bet he was going to that corner and you know, porpoising over those roots and thinking, I'm not going to make this turn. I've got to go into the grass here. And then he fell off his bike right in front of a tree, which was a good idea because he probably would have died otherwise. So 5 stars for Remco, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
5 stars. I hope that we can get porpoising trending.
Yeah. Well, they're going to be going so fast in 5 years that porpoising might be an issue.
Yeah.
When they cut an hour off the Roubaix time in the last 20 years. It used to be 6.5 hours. Now it's 5.5 hours because they're going so fast. And you know, that can't be helping some of these crashes, that the bikes are faster and more difficult to control. So that's not a great combination.
Yeah, this is unlikely to happen, especially in Grand Tours. I don't think it'll ever happen. I did hear Matt Stevens talk about this while he was commentating on a race earlier in the year. I mean, I do think we saw at Glasgow Worlds, once they got through the just wear the riders out portion of the race, maybe like the first 5 hours of the race, once they got into those circuits, and those circuits, to be clear, were incredibly dangerous. I do think that it proved, though, that you could put, you could have a race on a city center circuit that could be extremely difficult, really fun to watch. And I think where you could institute actual safety measures, and it would be, I know it's difficult to shut down city centers versus people rolling through the countryside, but there might be some cities, I don't know, Pittsburgh, where, Lawrence, Kansas, I don't know, where you could put on a race like this and could put in appropriate safety measures.
Oh, Andrew,
Do you think
Lawrence would chase him right out of downtown? It happened.
happened to BWR, actually? Yeah, but what do you think? Is this the direction that we're going to see things heading over time as traffic, furniture, and calming measures get, they're really there to help cars, pedestrians, and bikes when there's not a world tour race flying through at 40 miles an hour. But when that's happening, it doesn't seem to work out very well. So do we need to see a different style of racing, perhaps on a closed circuit, where we could see some of the safety measures that we've seen in F1 and, of course, NASCAR?
It's like I fed you this question. I'm like Mr. Closed Circuit. It's a little bit of sacrilege. The traditionalists don't like it because cycling's about point to point. You know, it's the Tour de France. You see France, you go around, you see the country. But I'm a big fan of closed circuit racing. I feel like it's better racing, like we saw at Glasgow. If you and I rode that course, if we rode a lap of that course, we'd say this is going to be the worst race in the world because you're going to have 200 guys sprinting for the win at the end of it, and it's going to be a crit. But no, something about circuits causes the race to be harder, causes it to be more selective. The racing's fantastic. I think it's much cheaper to put on for the organizer because it's a smaller, you don't have to secure as much of the roads. You don't have to, pay. I don't even know if in Europe, if they pay the cops. I think they ask the local authorities to pay the cops for them. And then, which is why you're seeing races like Ruta del Sol not be able to secure the roads because they're like, no, we're not going to do that for free for you. That's a ridiculous ask. But a solution to that is a closed circuit. And remember Amstel Gold, which is coming up this weekend. It's also, so it's cheaper to produce. It's cheaper to put on, cheaper to produce on TV, better TV. It's actually a way, if you really want to do a profitable race, it would be a closed circuit. In Amstel Gold a few years ago, remember they wouldn't let them do the big course because of COVID restrictions. So they did a circuit. Maybe I'm completely off base, but I thought that race was fine as a circuit. Like you don't necessarily need it to be point to point or like a big, there's a beauty of like Paris-Roubaix that they cover so much ground and like maybe that's sacred and isn't touched. But Flanders went to it's a big circuit, but they went to a final 50K. The last 50K are on a circuit basically. And I think the race is great. So no, I think circuits are the future. Maybe, as you say, you have to target smaller cities, like mid-tier cities that are happy to have the disruption that can kind of own the disruption versus a city like I'm going to Paris for the Olympics is basically a circuit race in Paris, and I guarantee you it's going to be very hard because all circuit races are, but that's like not sustainable. Paris cannot have a bunch of circuit races, so you'd probably have to do it in smaller cities.
They did. I mean, they used to do it in a few major cities. They had, I don't remember what the race was called, but they used to have a one-day race in San Francisco for a while.
But the key of that sentence is the tense, the past tense.
They had it. I don't think it's gonna.
Town.
It's definitely not going to happen there again. That's for sure, unless it's on a blockchain.
Yeah, I mean, you like NIMBYism is a problem. I don't know. We don't have to get into the politics of NIMBYism, but there's just a lot of people of like, I don't want the road shut off. Don't do that. So you have to find a willing community. But Tulsa, like, those are essentially circuit races, those crits, and they've kind of like come to define that month of the summer, and like the whole city gets into it. So if you can find a community like Tulsa, it doesn't have to be in the U.S., could be anywhere in the world, that leans into it, you can make it. I think you can make it really good, especially in the summer. Some of these cities don't have a ton going on because everyone's at the beach in Europe. So I think you could make it work.
Do you think the Tour of America's Dairyland is the future?
Toad, baby. Yes,
Toad.
That is the future. That will be the Tour de France by 2025. The ASO will give up. We'll say we cannot compete with Tour of America's Dairyland. It was actually really good racing in that region. I mean, obviously they were super weak, but the super week didn't live on.
Wasn't super forever. That's for sure.
They have like Intelligentsia Cup in Chicago and then Tour of America's Dairyland the next week in Wisconsin, north of Chicago, Milwaukee area. And they're both very successful. But yeah, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but something like that where you can find a willing like municipal partner and then make interesting circuits. That's the way to go, in my opinion. If you want to make profitable races that are safer, because circuits are safer, because it's not, you can make them better, but you also, it's not the first time you're seeing it. You're seeing the turn a bunch of times, so you're not going to go into it so fast that you take out half the field.
Yeah, and then there's the debate about, are crashes getting more horrific? I think they demonstrably are. They seem to take out way more riders, and it doesn't seem to matter where someone is positioned in the pack. I feel like just the last episode of Beyond the Peloton, we were talking about how Wout should have been in front, right? Like that's part of why he got taken out in that wreck. And then couple of days later, everyone in the front of the race gets taken out in a really horrific manner. So it kind of seems like no matter where you are in the race now, speeds are higher, surfaces are more uncontrolled, there's more traffic furniture, and riders are fitter than ever. We were talking about this a bit this week. Also, the vast majority of training that athletes do is solo. I mean, that's been the trend for quite a while, but more so now than ever before, we're seeing athletes, they're just popping into competition, teleporting from the volcano, all of those things. And I think that that's all having an impact on the severity of the crashes that we're seeing.
I mean, they're definitely going faster, which Remco was he was second wheel, I think, in that Basque Country crash. He still crashed. Unclear to me if he was clipped from behind or just crashed independently, but
porpoising. Porpoise is porpoise in a pack. Right? You don't just see a single porpoise. You go down to Zuma Beach in Malibu, you're going to see a pod. We saw a pod porpoising together at Basque Country.
I mean, I don't fully understand. I heard a wild theory today that the part of the reason crashes are getting more horrific is that modern life and like being so glued to your devices is making us less aware and like less able to deal with threats in real time. I mean, that might be a little like ethereal and out there, but people are definitely on their computers all the time on these races. And by computers, I mean their bike head units, not their laptops.
That's true. Yeah.
But if you have a bunch of people, and I just feel like the numberification of cycling where everything is about a metric, it's just people lose the ability to say like, we don't need to go this fast right now. This doesn't make any sense. This is dangerous. It's just like, no, I'm staring at my computer. This is the numbers I'm supposed to hit. Oh, and I'm staring at my computer to tell me where to go. I mean, people do it. Remco's lost races because he's staring at his computer in the final straightaway to look at the map of the final straightaway that he's in. So if that's happening at the end of races, I guarantee you it's happening on these descents.
Yeah, that's basically the matrix. I have so many questions about different small but significant safety measures that could be instituted. I was actually thinking about this watching Paris-Roubaix and looking at Mathieu van der Poel, who was on the radio quite a bit, especially in the bunch. I just kept thinking, why do people have to take their hand off the bars, touch their jersey, and cock their head down to talk? Isn't there some way? Couldn't you do something where you could have a blip or a bleep, whatever the remote shifters are called, or something on the brifters where you could push a button to push to talk?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Spencer.
Why don't they just keep it on? I guess maybe how do you cut deals with other teams though?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you have to. I'm imagining that wind is a big factor. It seems like there are potentially ways around there. You could use bone conduction microphones and other things that are not being used.
I guess it's all wired, which is why they would say there can't be a button. But yeah, that does seem sketchy for sure, because people take their hands off the bars all the time and you're doing it during fundamentally chaotic parts of the race, because you're never saying, hey, just wanted to let you know it's pretty easy right now and I'm not doing anything. It's just like whenever the stuff is hitting the fan, that's when you're on the radio. That's when it's most dangerous to take your hands off the bars. One more thing before we go, one little piece of cleanup here. I didn't want to let this slip through. So if the Rude Hoofs have turned around Alpecin or turned it into what it is, I think his name is Maureen Zeman at Visma Lisa Bike. He's like the mastermind behind their like performance systems. I actually think Pluget talked about this when he was on this very podcast. He talked about Zeman and how he was a key member of that team from the early days. He's leaving to go to professional soccer, the world of professional soccer. Pretty interesting move, but that is brutal for Visma. I think that's a huge loss for them.
Pro soccer is now the ultimate proving ground for the biggest strategic minds in professional cycling.
Is cycling too easy for you?
Well, I mean, are we going to see him go head to head with Brailsford in some kind of battle of the wills?
Absolutely. As actually, I mean, I would do the same thing. If someone came to me right now and said, hey, you want to go work at a Dutch professional soccer team and shut down Beyond the Peloton, I'd be handing the keys over to you, Andrew, and I'd be out of here. I'd be on the first plane to Amsterdam. But it is like a meat grinder. People get chewed up in that sport at that level, at the management level. So part of it is seems a little risky. But at the same time, his team almost shut down last year because they couldn't find a sponsor. So maybe he thought, no, that's why don't I strike while the iron is hot and go to a bigger sport?
Bigger, better, deal it.
And the sport isn't mobile. I bet that is a positive, that it's like, well, I don't have to sleep in a different hotel room every night. I can just go to one game and come home, and it's much more comfortable.
Yeah, likely a better hotel as well, unless you play for the Kansas City Chiefs, and then you got a couple of roommates. They're bringing in a fold-up bed.
That is ridiculous, by the way. And then the teams make you pay like $1,700 a night for your own room, but that's higher than the market rate for the room, which means the team is pocketing the difference. It's like crazy that that's allowed. Oh man, don't get me started on these owners. Did you know that the Chiefs now are like, it's the classic language? We're going to have to explore all the options. For those who don't know, there was a ballot measure in Andrew's hometown of Kansas City,
Kansas City, Missouri.
And my people, the Kansans freeload off of the Missourians in Kansas City, because we say, what do you mean? Just build them a new stadium. What's the big deal? But because they built a city with a state line right through the middle of the city, that means Missouri has to foot the tax bill for all these infrastructure projects, and Kansans just get to use them and don't have to pay for them. But yeah, the ballot measure didn't even come close to passing for the Chiefs refurbished stadium, the Royals' new stadium, and now it's like the classic language is coming out of like, we're going to have to explore all the options. Like, AK, we're going to try to move the team to get a new free stadium somewhere. I think someone has to put their foot down, and I'm glad Kansas City did it. Like, don't build these people stadiums. Like, they can afford their own stadium. They bought the team for $25,000. It's not worth $5 billion. So take out a little margin loan there, buddy, and build a new stadium if you need to.
Yeah, if Arrowhead Stadium were a ceiling in your basement, it would be a sprayed popcorn ceiling, and it would be a rec room, right? Like that's the kind of
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, that's the kind of stadium it is. And you know what? It's just fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
It works.
Fine.
It works okay. It's a great place to go get frostbite. Lots of fans getting frostbite out there over the winter, watching the games. Yeah.
In retrospect, potentially a mistake to hold a game in like negative 30-degree temperatures. I'm not quite sure how that happened.
Whatever it takes to pursue a championship, that's sport.
You go to like English soccer stadiums, and they're all very old, much older than Arrowhead, but it's kind of like charming. It's like exposed brick would be the vibe I would give it. And then something about U.S. sports stadiums, they age so oddly. It's like a house built in the 70s. Where you're like, was this what was going on here? What was the architectural style? But it's fine, as you say. They don't. Yeah, I just feel like the stadium, like they're talking about tearing down the Broncos Stadium in Denver. And I remember them building that stadium. It was like 20 years ago. It was like, what are we doing? Like taxpayers pay for a stadium, and then in 20 years you tear it down and make them pay for another one, and we're going to do this over and over and over again. Like this is absurd.
It doesn't have that new car smell anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Trade it in, get rid of it. When you're not footing the bill, why not? I guess.
Yeah, and you can pick up a new car out there at the Elway Ford dealership. So come on down.
Consumer culture. But no, I'm very proud of your people, Andrew, putting their foot down. At some point, these teams have to run out of cities to move to, I'd imagine. Like, is this like a Ponzi scheme that comes due at some point? But now I heard London, Frankfurt, Munich, Mexico City are on the table. So they've had to pull in new cities to threaten to move to get free stadiums.
Yeah, Spencer, I know this is a provocative thing for me to say, but I'm on the record as being a capitalist, and I don't think that the Hunts need corporate welfare. Yeah.
Barely getting by. Barely getting by. But yeah, no, I thought that was, I mean, it was reported on that Zeman left. I thought it was kind of under emphasized that he left to leave the sport. It does kind of make your sport feel like a little brother, where it's like, he just left to be like a middle manager at Dutch soccer it's proud. It's a proud football culture, but it's not the tippy top of the spear there. So yeah, it hurt me that he left. It reminded me where cycling stands in the grand scheme of things, but interesting for him. And I'm sure it does kind of underline too, like working for these teams at a high level is probably quite not the nicest life, I'd imagine. And he probably made it for somewhat lifestyle choices as well as interesting professional work.
Yeah. And just another reminder too, that super teams are generally not super for that long. See Ineos.
Very good point. Yes. If someone could have cashed their Ineos stock out at the high point, they'd probably feel pretty good about that.
We'll see if Pidcock's laughing at us though come July.
Oh man, when he wins the Tour, we're gonna look so dumb. It was all the plan all along. He will have to get through like the 5 leaders on that team. And we will finish this podcast at some point. But that reminded me. I saw Geraint Thomas suggest Tadej should skip the Giro now and go straight to the Tour since it's wide open for him. What are your thoughts on that, Andrew?
I kind of agree with Geraint Thomas.
I mean, it makes the most sense. Does it look kind of weird?
Is it sport? Is it sporting? Is it sporting?
Because it wasn't the whole line of like, I'm doing the Giro because I love the Giro. It's like, actually, I just thought I couldn't beat Tad or Jonas. And now I think I can win the Tour.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what goes down. Do you think he might forego the Giro? Do you think he has massive appearance money on the line though, right? Don't we think he's getting paid like 2-3 million euros to show?
Yeah, and if he hasn't already spent that, he's like mentally spent it. So I don't think he.
Yeah, good point.
I don't think he's putting that back. He's probably starting it. I mean, he's so good though. He could not be 100% at the Giro and win. And
it's not about being good. It's about risk exposure though. I think it's about wrecking and not making it to the
ride
Tour.
First wheel for 3 weeks of the Giro. Never
watch out for the tree roots. Yeah,
off the front. and you'll be. Have the tree roots been overblown though? Because if you think about it, doesn't every road have tree roots under it?
You're the person who's brought up porpoising, so I'm not sure what to say.
I definitely saw people porpoising on that turd. And I've been on corners that have tree roots, like I guess pressing against the asphalt, and it is actually quite difficult to ride on them.
Yeah, if you go from porpoising on tree roots to breaching like a whale, then you have a big problem.
Yeah, if you're literally being tossed off the road at 50 miles an hour.
If your pod begins to breach, you have severe trouble. Please contact customer service.
Well, we see people just doing full suspension. Like what happened? Remember the bike changes at the top? Like Jan Ulrich used to change bikes at the top of mountains sometimes.
That's because he had those lightweight wheels.
Yeah, like they're light, but they will fall apart. So you cannot descend on them.
Yeah. I don't think that's something you wanted to try.
On that note, the sport probably has gotten a little bit safer. If you think about what are they called? The Spinacci bars. Remember those?
Oh, Spinacci bars. How about
bars?
Does anybody remember? Spinergy is still around. The coolest product they ever made was the RevX, which was their 4-spoke wheel, which was actually 8 bladed carbon spokes. I say bladed; they were bladed like a knife. And if anyone recalls, world champion Michele Bartoli had his kneecap amputated. I'm not making this up, by a Spinergy wheel, and it basically ended his career. He did come back after that, but kneecap reattachment, even though they have a lot of years of reattaching kneecaps, it was not at its apex in that era in Italy. And when he came back, he was never the same again.
Yeah, and if you've seen one of these wheels, this sounds gruesome and like, wow, what a freak accident. If you saw one of those wheels, you'd say, I'm surprised that wasn't happening every race. Because they were just literal knives or swords, katanas, basically.
They were cool looking.
Floating around out there, yes.
Yeah. If you have one on your fixed gear, you're going to want to get rid of it. I think they stopped being rideable about 15 years ago.
All right. Well, we're going to cut out the last 30 minutes of this podcast, but thanks for hanging around. Anyone that's still here. Thank you, Andrew. And we'll talk we'll convene during the Ardennes week at some point to talk about hopefully more interesting racing than we've seen at the cobbles.
That sounds great. I'm going to be back in Kansas City next week if anyone wants to catch up for a group ride. And I'm planning on personally beginning to construct a stadium in downtown Kansas City.
The People's Stadium.
If you want to join me, we can, dig the first shovelful of soil and lay the first brick. Let it begin with us.
Yeah, now I wonder if I should come out and we should do like Perry Dam series or something. That would be good content. All right, well, thanks and good luck on those travels.